everyone, my name is Shukri Ali. I'm the Business Development Manager here at SortSpoke. Today's webinar will be 20 minutes long and we'll leave 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. And if you have any trouble with the audio also, please inform us within the chat box and we'll address that as soon as possible. I'll turn it over to Brandon and Craig now.
Thanks, Shukri, and thanks everyone on the line for joining us on this webinar. I've got Brandon Robinson, our Director of Customer Success, joining me, and I'm Craig Mauchan, VP of Sales. Just a brief overview of the agenda for the next couple of minutes. We're going to do a few slides. We'll promise we'll keep those to a minimum. We really want to spend some time showing you the system through the demo. We'll conclude with some final thoughts, and then we'll open up the discussion for Q&A. So just a little bit of background on the National Mortgage Conference that Shukri and I were at a couple of weeks ago. It's always interesting to talk to people at events like this, and we know that people don't get out of bed in the morning being excited about data extraction. It's just not a reality. We wish it was, but it's just not a reality. What they do get excited about, though, I can tell you, is that when we have an opportunity to tell them about what we do and how we do it, and they get an opportunity to see the system in action, and they really truly are excited. And it's one of them where it's the thing I love about this job the most, is seeing that reaction to seeing SortSpoke working. So anyway, without further ado, Brandon, over to you.
Thanks, Craig. I thought we'd start today by just doing a little reset on kind of what SortSpoke is for those of you who have seen it before or haven't heard about us much in the past. SortSpoke is a machine learning backed data extraction tool. We're cloud-based, and we explicitly do just data extraction. We're here to help you do extraction of data from documents when you have a bunch of human beings that work on application processes or any sort of workflow where there's a bunch of documents that come in as part of a workflow, to help them get the data out of those documents and turn them into structured data so that they can use them downstream. We're really focused on boosting productivity, helping decrease errors and risk, and really helping to speed up the turnaround time. We're a little different, and we'll go into how in a couple of minutes, compared to some other technologies that you might have looked at. But think about SortSpoke and you think about data extraction, that's where we fit the best. We know that your team processes millions of documents, and we know that that's a sore spot for you. One of the things that we're going to focus on in today's webinar is how we can help them be more productive. As users are actually working through the process of extracting data from documents, it takes away time from other tasks. Not everybody is dedicated to doing data extraction on a full-time basis. What we find is lots of users actually spend 20 or 30% of their time extracting data from documents, and they don't realize how much it's eating into their productivity on a daily basis. And we all know that we do make mistakes if we're typing data as opposed to extracting it from these documents directly. So we try to offer the kind of the best of both worlds, where you get the increased productivity, but you still get to focus the users on the highest value portion of their job, which is the actual quality of the data that they're extracting from these documents. As I kind of alluded to a second ago, in mortgage, Canadian mortgage processing specifically, there's a couple of areas that we help. We focus on everything from new applications to helping with renewals and even helping with discharges. And there's a wide variety of documents that are listed up here that I'm sure many of you would know better than I, of things that could be possible. I'll show you a couple of samples of these today from an applications kind of workflow standpoint, pull out a couple, proof of insurance, that sort of thing, out of a renewals discussion. And there's lots of other opportunities to use SortSpoke. And we'll cover that right at the end and just tell you a little bit about the other places that SortSpoke helps in organizations in addition to mortgage processing. So SortSpoke's a little bit different than other technologies or services or tools that you might have looked at the past. We don't do any pre-training. We don't have a learned model for a bunch of stuff and say, hey, plug yourself into it and get started. We actually say, go ahead and start it from scratch using your users and let them drive the system. So you're actually in charge and control of what you're extracting and why and what fields you'd like, so that you don't have to worry about spending a lot of time getting it ready. You just sit down in front of SortSpoke and you get it started in hours. And it's driven by your subject matter experts, your users that are on the ground. And you don't need to call in a team of consultants to set up templates. You don't need to do a whole 6 months of pre-training. And you don't need to get a lot of support from others that don't know the document or the subject matter. You give that to your power users, your best teams, and they actually can get SortSpoke up and running and start to get benefit from it very quickly. How it works is you actually start by putting your documents into the system, whether it's contracts or MLS documents or leases or insurance documents, and then you just start to extract the data that you want by selecting fields of information. And I'll show you that in just a moment. And then as you continue to extract those fields, SortSpoke actually starts to learn on the fly and think about those pieces of information that you're extracting and starts to help you do that job by suggesting values to you in those different fields as you go forward. And that's where the productivity boost starts to come in. It's a pretty straightforward workflow. Your users will load the documents into SortSpoke, and there's a number of different ways to get documents in and out of SortSpoke. Once the documents are loaded, they'll actually start to do a QA. They'll check the suggestions that SortSpoke's made any adjustments, and maybe fill in some of the values that weren't suggested yet. And then every time they finish a document, they get an extracted, structured data file that they can then use downstream, whether it's an Excel file or a JSON or a link into a workflow or productivity tool to send that structured data that came out of those documents downstream so that they can use it in the next step. Instead of just talking about it, I'll give you a quick demo. I'm going to switch over now to my demo system. Just give me one sec. SortSpoke is a cloud-based system, and as you can see here, it's easily accessible just by a web browser. And what users will do in the morning is they'll log into the system and either load their documents themselves, or they'll just come into the system and documents will be waiting for them. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see the different fields of information that I'm looking to extract. In this case, from these sample MLS documents, I've just created some simple information about these. Over here on the left-hand side, you can see the different kinds of documents that I've been working on in SortSpoke that are available for you to work on. And these are completely in your control. You can create any kind of document that you want to work on and any kind of field that you want to extract from a document. At the very beginning, SortSpoke doesn't know anything about any kind of document. And what's really cool about it is you can actually use your cursor to actually just select the value. So in this case, if I want to find the MLS number, it's as simple as just saying, hey, this is what I'm looking for. I use my cursor to extract it. I hit accept, and I move on to the next field. I've been working on this category of this kind of document a little bit, so I've got some suggestions from SortSpoke coming through on these different fields. And this is kind of when SortSpoke's up and running. I've done about 40 documents of these so far. I just go through and I do a guided review of the suggestions that SortSpoke is making for me. And I pay particular attention at this point to make sure the data is accurate and make sure there's nothing missing. If in the event that something was incorrect, let's say that this value, this is apartment, isn't enough. I actually wanted condo and a condo apartment. So I just use my cursor to highlight it. And a couple of things have just happened by me doing that. One, I'm being able to focus my time as my human power to get the most accurate data out of the system. But this is also how I give feedback to SortSpoke's machine learning to say, hey, you were close, you got me some of the value, but I actually wanted both of these things. And because I've made that adjustment, it'll actually learn and adapt on the fly because I did that, and I'll start to improve that model over time. I'll continue the review process for the remainder of the document. And when I'm done, I'll just press the accept document button. Pressing that accept document button is what actually generates the output file, and that document's now available for me downstream. One of the things that I'll highlight at this point is there are a number of different formats for these kind of MLS looking files. There's like no end to the difference of them, everything from English to French, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. And we started training it on a little bit of everything. And you can see that SortSpoke's doing a pretty good job of actually pulling data across all these different variations. And this is really a strong point for SortSpoke in this discussion. There are things that we do really well in terms of handling the variation. Because you keep that human being in the loop, you actually have a better chance at covering kind of the spread of the stuff. Actually, this is a great example here. I didn't get all the values I wanted off of this document. So it's made suggestions on some of the stuff which look okay. But there are some other fields that there's actually a mistake here. I can see that that's a 5. So this is where I'm saying the user gets to focus on the accuracy of the data and to go back and make any adjustments. And this is the kind of power that you can give to your team to say, we'll help you get through this process that you're doing anyway, but just allow you to do it and focus on the accuracy of the information. Some of the other examples of documents that we've got some redacted proof of insurance documents here that came in as it relates to the mortgage application. And then as you're going through these documents, we're actually going to be able to say, pulling out more information, presumably in a non-redacted scenario, you'd be pulling out more. But again, the variety of these and the variation of all the different carriers that they're coming from is quite extreme. In addition to that, we've also been working a little bit on some of the other documents that might come in. In this case, here's some T4s when people say, hey, I just want to be able to prove my income that's related to this new application. So T4s are a really simple example. You might be using an OCR technology for it today. I just use it for illustration. But if you have a number of different types of proof of income, whether they're bank statements or investment statements or letters from employers saying, person name X has salary Y, we confirm that. All of those things can be processed with SortSpoke, and it's a great example of some of the other things that you can use as part of a workflow to handle a whole bunch of documents around a single application at the same time. I'll do a real quick demo here of something of how it actually kind of works in the real world from our experience. Users will typically send in, or applications will typically come in a package. So I'll just upload a PDF, and in this PDF, I've got a bunch of different document types. I've got an MLS file, I've got like a mortgage, a proof of insurance, I've got a proof of income, and I've got a letter from my employer. And what SortSpoke does on the fly is, as it ingests these documents, it actually sorts them into the different categories that it thinks it is, based on the past experience that it's had from working on documents in this system. And this is what we consider the classification step or the sorting step. And what happens is, as SortSpoke sees more and more examples, it starts to say, hey, we think this is this kind of document, and suggests it to us. So that's the machine learning at work in terms of classification. I'm just gonna move it over to that extract screen where I was working earlier, and I'll go and find that document right here. And I just so happen to know that it's got a bunch of other files in it, and this is a real world thing where different pages have different stuff in it saying, here's a letter from an employer, and here's kind of my proof of insurance and my T4. I can't process them all together. I do need to split them up. So SortSpoke actually has the ability for you to do this kind of on the fly. I'll show you how we do that. So I can see just by eyeballing it that the first document looks like an MLS. That's a letter of employment or letter of income, which is cool, but I'm not processing it in this example, so I'll just go ahead and leave that behind. I'll sort this one into its category. I think that's a T4 for my income, so I'll send that one there. And then by doing this, I'm going to press this split document button. SortSpoke's going to say, hey, you left a page behind, which is okay because I intentionally did that. And then these other three files are now going to be moved into each of those different categories, starting with this MLS file here. And you can see that now that I've split it up, there's this kind of red icon just keeping them all together. I'll go and show you that in just a second. And SortSpoke started to make the suggestions on the fields that it can find in this document kind of live on the fly. Same thing for that proof of insurance document. There's that little red icon just to tell me that it was related. It started to pull the information off of that file, as well as it would be the same thing for that T4 from that same file. And this is a great example that illustrates in the real world, stuff doesn't come in nice and tidy. You can actually split it up and process it on the fly in SortSpoke and save yourself a couple of steps in that pre-process if that's something that's one of your challenges. Shifting gears a little bit just to show you some of the other things that we can do. I don't have a mortgage application in the system, but what I'll show you is something that's sort of similar. This is from an auto, an auto credit scenario. And there's a lot of check boxes and different looks and feels of stuff on these pages. And SortSpoke does a great job of also pulling out check boxes and kind of semi-structured information like this from application files. So if you don't have a solution at the moment for your applications, there's the opportunity to use SortSpoke for this kind of stuff too. And SortSpoke's pretty cool in the way that it does checkboxes. It actually helps you figure out if a box is checked or unchecked as part of its machine learning. So one of the really high power things here is if there's a lot of checkboxes on a form or a document that you're working on, we can help you save a bunch of time and get true false values out very quickly for your users to be able to get the information off of those pages and then send that information downstream and start to use it for other purposes. That's the end of our quick demo. I'm going to hand it back to Craig for just a minute and give you a little bit more context around SortSpoke in your engagements. Craig?
Thanks, Brendan. So why use SortSpoke? What are the key benefits that you're going to derive here? The obvious one is productivity. So this is actually some real data from one of our clients. Who was spending 10 minutes to manually process a few different types of mortgage documents prior to using SortSpoke, and with SortSpoke, they're now doing that job in about 1.5 minutes. So productivity, key benefit. The other areas where they're seeing significant benefits are in the quality of the data that they are extracting, because now their people are very focused on that quality of data and don't have to do that mundane work. The other couple other things I'll point out is the flexibility of the tool. If you have to ingest a new document type, you can do it on the fly. Your users can help train SortSpoke by processing that document on the fly. There's no need to call us, no need to call IT. And finally, I'll just mention capacity. A number of the situations we get involved in, the client actually takes a look at the entire process and looks at the people doing the work and finds that they can actually move some of this work to lower paid staff. Just to give you an idea of what you can expect from us when you do a POC, and this is actually a chart that we provide to all of our clients at the end of a POC. It tracks two things that are critical to judging and evaluating SortSpoke. The red line is an indication of the time to process. So you can see it's sloping down to the right, indicating that as the POC progressed, the time to process documents was reduced. This gives you a trend line and an idea of where you ultimately might end up with in terms of the metric when using SortSpoke. The other line, which slopes up and to the right, is the accuracy level. So these are the two metrics that you could expect to see from us after a POC. Finally, I want to mention, and this is kind of an interesting one as well, which is the regulatory compliance. Because SortSpoke is an intended solution and it's using the expertise of your people combined with artificial intelligence, you've got a very auditable process, and it in fact it avoids the whole black box problem that many data extraction tools have, which is they take the documents in and the data comes out the other side with really no ability to quality manage that data. So how do you start working with us? Simple. Book a discovery call. We'd be happy to chat with you and help you decide on a use case. We'll get you set up for a POC. We'll track your results for you. We'll present those results to you at the end of the POC, and then what we want you to do is proceed to production. Where else do we help? Because of the versatility of this tool, and as Brandon said at the top, this is not a pre-programmed system. This is not based on templates. This is a very, very versatile tool that can be used in a variety of different places. So some of the work we do involves helping with commercial lending, automobile loans, back office, and innovation and technology areas. We have native integrations with UiPath and Pega on the RPA side, which makes a very, very high performance combination that really drives efficiencies. Final thought. Your people are your greatest asset. AI, in its best place, should help them scale. It should help them be more productive. It should help them increase their job satisfaction. SortSpoke does just that. It puts a very easy to use and very powerful AI capability in their hands, in the hands of the business users, and gives them control of how they work. Over to you, Shukri.
So this brings us to the question portion of the webinar. We do have a few questions that are in the chat box that we'll be starting with. So the first question is, can it read scanned files, as in does it recognize fonts?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think you kind of saw some of that in action today. You know, what happens with documents on the way in the door is if they already have an OCR layer on them, then we're good to just process them or respect them as is. If they are the kind of a file that you maybe just got a picture or an image PDF and there's no OCR on it, we'll actually pass it through an OCR engine on the way in the door and then start to SortSpoke it from that point. That's a bit of an automatic process. We just use an off-the-shelf commercial OCR to help with that portion of it. But then at that point, once the text is readable on the document, SortSpoke will take over and start to do all of the thinking around the suggestions and the sorting that you would have seen me doing during the demo.
The next question we have is, how many documents do I need to train SortSpoke?
I think that's probably the number one question that we get. Generally speaking, it depends on the complexity of the use case, but in our experience, planning for somewhere between 100 and 250 documents of a single type of a bunch of varieties that you might see in the real world is generally the right rule of thumb. I will make special call outs to the MLS files and maybe the discharge letters as it relates to mortgage payouts. There is so much variety in some of those, two document types that you might want to look at more like 500 documents to start really see efficacy. But SortSpoke starts working immediately, and in that first 30 to 50 documents, you're actually going to start to see those suggestions like you were seeing today in the demonstration, which was me training that up from real world documents. That's the kind of curve that you can expect, and as Craig showed in that slide around results, SortSpoke does learn very quickly, and it does help it get to a place where you're able to start to see return on investment in days, not in months.
Next question we have is, where is your data center?
We have 2 data centers at the moment. One is in Canada, one is in the United States. We're hosted on AWS. So depending on the jurisdiction that you need to keep your data in, the 2 data centers are separate from each other, and you can operate in either of those 2.
The next question is, can you process handwriting?
Generally, handwriting's not the best fit for SortSpoke. If there's a couple of fields of handwriting on a document, like someone scribbled in the date and maybe their name, something like that, and then the rest of the application form or the document itself is a bunch of machine-generated text, there's a good opportunity to work with it there. You'll still get a good productivity uplift on finding the stuff that's handwritten, but we don't do any better a job of recognizing handwritten characters than most others. If it's primarily a handwritten document, like if an application form, for instance, was like almost 100% handwritten, that's probably not a great fit for SortSpoke, but happy to have a chat about it. Why don't we see some samples and have a talk about it?
And what is the onboarding process for my team? Typically, how long are you seeing teams take to get trained on SortSpoke?
I think that the easy part is learning how to use SortSpoke. The web interface that you saw me working on is really straightforward. It's no different from user to user. I'd say the hard part about learning this is actually the subject matter or the workflow or the use case that we're working on. You generally want to keep human beings involved in this process that are subject matter experts that process these documents every day, that really know them inside out and backwards and say, oh, I see this field or this piece of information shows up on page 6, but in this other example, in these conditions, it's on page 9. That level of subject matter expertise is really the key. I would say that within 1 business day, most people are very comfortable processing documents in SortSpoke. And in most cases, when we start with folks, whether it's in a trial or in their early production rollouts for users that have never seen it before, hour and a half, everybody's kind of like, okay, cool. Can I go back to my desk and work on this now? And we're like, yep. Have fun, and they go, okay, thanks, and then that's kind of the learning curve that we expect. It's very intentionally not a super heavy training, complex kind of process. We want it to feel easy, and we want it to be seamless for them in their existing workflows.
And the last and final question is, do you have an API sandbox for prospect clients to try out?
We do, yeah, we're happy to offer trials. As Craig mentioned, one of the things that we would suggest is having a quick discovery call with us and then looking at what you might want to use SortSpoke for. We're happy to provide kind of low cost or no cost in most cases access to proof of concepts. So give us a shout, let us know kind of what's on your mind and we'll get you access. And just as it relates to APIs, SortSpoke does have an API that allows you to send documents in and receive the output files back out from SortSpoke, all through a REST API, so you don't have to do a whole bunch of extra integration. That's really all you might need to do depending on the workflow that you're trying to wedge it inside.
I believe that brings us to the end of our Q&A portion of the webinar. If anybody has any follow-up questions, please feel free to contact us at sales@sortspoke.com. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today, and keep an eye out on our next webinar.